The storm rolled in with no warning. Thunder growled low like a wounded beast, dragging its claws across the sky. Dust rose from the trail as a lone rider pushed his weary horse to its limit. The rider wore no badge, no mark, except a bandana soaked in blood and guilt. Cradled in one arm was a baby wrapped in rough wool, crying against the wind. The church came into view, small, wooden, leaning slightly west like it had given up resisting the wind years ago. The rider dismounted, boots crunching through gravel. No one saw him. No one ever did. He laid the child at the chapel's doorstep, knelt for 1 second longer than a coward should, then vanished into the rain. Inside, a candle flickered behind stained glass. Lightning flashed, and the baby wailed louder than the thunder. Morning wouldn't bring sunlight. Only questions. At dawn the preacher opened the chapel door, expecting only dust and silence. Instead, a sound pierced the morning stillness, a newborn's cry. Reverend Elijah froze. He hadn't heard a child's voice in that place since his wife bled out giving birth. His hand trembled as he pushed open the door further. The child was there, soaked and shivering, wrapped in a cloth marked by a symbol Elijah hadn't seen in over a decade, the brand of the Blackfang gang. The same outlaws who murdered his wife. The preacher's face twisted. Anger. Confusion. Pain. He looked skyward, as if demanding an answer from the God he still served but barely trusted. Then kneeling, he gathered the boy into his arms. "Who would do this?" he muttered. The child whimpered, then stilled, and Elijah's heart, broken for years, beat something strange again, hope or horror he couldn't tell. Elijah paced the wooden floor, the baby swaddled in fresh linen now. He stared at the mark on the discarded cloth like it was poison. The Blackfangs were dead, or so he believed. He'd buried his rage deep, but here it was, crying in his arms. The church felt colder. The ghosts of his past whispered from every pew. What if this child was blood to the man who ended her life? Elijah's jaw tightened. He looked down. The baby blinked up at him, eyes wide, searching, innocent. No evil in them, yet. Elijah sank into the front pew, the same place he'd once sat beside his wife. "I should turn you away," he said. "But I won't." He sighed, weary. "Not because I forgive him, because someone has to stop the cycle, even if it breaks me." Word spread like wildfire in dry grass. By sundown, every man and woman in town knew the preacher had taken in a child left at the chapel. And not just any child, one marked by a name that still made folks spit. Whispers danced in alleys and drifted through saloons. "He's keeping a viper in the pulpit," some said. "It's mercy," others argued. Elijah stood firm, quiet as always, but the fire in his eyes warned anyone thinking of crossing his threshold. Still, fear is louder than faith. Church pews grew empty. Donors vanished. But Elijah didn't bend. He held the child tighter, even as his voice cracked during sermons. The church bell rang lonelier now. But for Elijah, it tolled like a vow. A week later, the baptism bowl was filled. Elijah stood alone at the altar, robes faded, eyes red. He'd written the name in the church ledger by hand. Jonah. Not black, untamed. Not orphan. Just Jonah. He spoke the words with cracked lips and steady hands, water glistening on the boy's forehead. "You are not your father," he whispered. "You are mine now." The baby cooed. Outside, a raven screeched and took flight. It would not be the last darkness circling overhead. But for now, Elijah had made his choice. And heaven or hell would have to deal with it. Jonah was 12 now. Taller than most boys, quieter too. His eyes carried the weight of men twice his age, and his silence was louder than any sermon. The chapel steps became his favorite place. He'd sit there dusk to dark sketching faces he saw only in dreams, men with guns, women screaming, a preacher crying behind stained glass. Elijah watched from inside, heart aching. Jonah never asked where he came from. But the preacher knew the question boiled under his skin like poison not yet lanced. One night, as stars bled across the sky, Jonah whispered to himself, "I ain't like them." And yet, he didn't sound sure. The fight started with a whisper. "Devil's son," the town boy muttered, just loud enough. Jonah ignored it, at first. But when a rock flew and struck his sketchbook, something inside him snapped. He stood slow, fists clenched, veins pulsing in his neck. The boy's grin faded. Jonah didn't swing. He didn't shout. He just stared, burning. The town boy backed away, confused by a fury that didn't need noise. Elijah arrived seconds too late. He put his hand on Jonah's shoulder, but the boy flinched. "He called me what you wouldn't," Jonah said. Elijah didn't answer. There were no words for that kind of wound. That night, Elijah sat on the edge of Jonah's bed, silent. Jonah stared at the ceiling, the silence between them sharp as broken glass. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jonah finally asked. Elijah didn't ask what he meant. He just closed his eyes. "Because truth ain't always healing," he said. "Sometimes it's a wound that never closes." Jonah sat up, eyes dark. "Then what am I?" Elijah sighed. "You're a choice I made, not a curse." Jonah's lips trembled. He was a monster. Elijah nodded slowly. "But you ain't him." Jonah didn't cry. He never did. But something in him cracked open that night. And it would never close again. At high noon, a stagecoach arrived, its wheels groaning, dust trailing like ghosts. From it stepped a man dressed too fine for a place like this. He wore a white hat, clean boots, and a badge that glittered in the sun. Judge Silas Greeley. He walked like a man who'd never feared justice because he'd always defined it. Townsfolk parted like wheat before the blade. He looked around, squinted at the chapel, then smirked. "Still standing," he said to no one. When he laid eyes on Jonah watching from the shadows, something in his expression shifted. Not surprise. Recognition. As if history had stepped out of the grave. That night, Jonah couldn't sleep. Greeley's eyes haunted him, too knowing, too calm. He crept down to Elijah's study, barefoot, heart thudding like hooves in the dark. On the desk sat a locked drawer. He'd seen Elijah open it 100 times. Tonight, he found the key in a hollowed Bible. Inside were letters, old, stained, torn at the edges. One bore the name, Cassian Black. Another bore the judge's seal. Jonah's hands shook. A drawing fell out, his face as a baby, sketched by a dying hand. "What are you hiding from me?" he whispered. But the house stayed silent. And the truth waited in the dark. Jonah didn't sleep the next night either. His mind roamed like a caged wolf, gnawing through memories. At first light, he returned to the drawer. This time he took the whole box. Inside, beneath letters and old photographs, he found something heavier, a revolver wrapped in linen, and beneath it, a map kicked wild. The paper crackled in his hands. Faded ink traced the edge of the territory. Names were crossed out. One word was circled in bold, Greeley. Jonah stared at it for a long time, pulse pounding in his ears. This wasn't just a drawer of memories. It was a war chest. A record of vengeance never delivered. And now he held it. A storm was building inside him. It was no longer a question of whether Elijah had lied. It was whether Jonah was ready to know why. Elijah found Jonah on the chapel rooftop, the box beside him, wind tearing through his hair. He didn't speak. Just sat beside him, legs dangling like he was a boy again. "Why'd you hide it?" Jonah asked without looking. Elijah didn't lie this time. "Because I wanted you to be better than the man I was becoming." Jonah turned. "Was Cassian Black my father?" Elijah nodded once. "He was, but not the man who killed your mother. That wasn't him." Jonah clenched his jaw. "Then why does Greeley know my face?" Elijah's eyes darkened. "Because the man who ordered your father hunted. also knew how to bury the truth. Jonah whispered, "And you let him?" Elijah didn't answer. Silence was answer enough. Later that day, Jonah sat alone behind the chapel, tracing the map with his finger. He marked the trail to a place called Hollow Bluff. In the corner of the paper, someone had scrawled a note. She saw it all. "Ask her." Jonah folded it tight, tucked it in his shirt. The revolver felt heavy at his side. It didn't scare him. What scared him was how natural it felt to carry. He stood, brushing dirt from his pants. He wasn't a boy anymore. Not after this. As he turned back toward the church, a shadow crossed the dirt, Judge Greeley watching from the road. Jonah held his stare. Neither blinked. One knew too much. The other was ready to burn everything to find out. That night, Elijah met Greeley in the shadows of the empty saloon. No one else dared be out that late. "He knows," Elijah said flatly. Greeley sipped from a glass, face unreadable. "Then the boy's faster than you were." Elijah bristled. "Don't talk about what you buried. He deserves the truth." Greeley set his glass down hard. "The truth got men killed, and it'll bury him too." Elijah stepped closer. "You framed Cassian, and now the boy's caught in your storm." Greeley leaned in, voice low as a snake's hiss. "You raised him with fire in his blood. If he burns, it's on you." For the first time in years, Elijah's hand moved near his sidearm. Greeley saw, and smiled. Jonah stood outside the saloon, every word filtering through the cracks like smoke. The betrayal burned hotter than the desert sun. Elijah had known the truth, and spared the man who'd twisted his life into a lie. Jonah didn't wait for them to leave. He turned and ran, boots slamming into dust. He packed only what he needed: a canteen, the map, the gun. No goodbyes. Just a note. "I need to know who I am." By sunrise, his silhouette vanished down the same trail his father once rode. He didn't know where the road would end, only that it started with lies. And he'd keep walking until he found the truth, or burned with it. Greeley's boots clicked across the chapel floor, echoing like a gavel in a silent court. Elijah stood at the altar, hands clasped like a man waiting for absolution he knew wouldn't come. "He's gone," the judge said. "Your prodigal son has wandered into fire." Elijah didn't flinch. "You've haunted him his whole life." Greeley stepped closer. "I'm offering peace. You give me Jonah, and I'll make sure he lives. Clean record. Fresh start." Elijah's voice was gravel. "You don't offer salvation. You offer erasure." The judge smirked. "You think this land runs on mercy? It runs on what people believe, and I make them believe what's clean." Elijah's jaw tightened. "He's not yours to rewrite." Greeley's eyes narrowed. "He's not yours either." Elijah watched the judge leave, each step down the chapel aisle sounding like a verdict. He turned back toward the altar, heart pounding. This house of God had seen more sin than salvation. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of holding back too long. He walked to the back room, opened the locked chest for the last time. The journal lay there. The one that told of Cassian's innocence, of the judge's lies, of a son never meant to be raised in chains of silence. Elijah ran his hand over the cover, then closed it. "Lord, I may be a preacher," he whispered, "but I've kept secrets fit for hell." He loaded the revolver with slow purpose. Time to confess. Jonah followed the map's edge to Hollow Bluff, a jagged ridge of red rock and scorched trees. The wind screamed like old ghosts. A fire pit marked the center, long cold, but littered with broken bottles and bones. He stepped around the ruin until he found her. A woman in her 40s, back straight despite the crutch, face worn by time and fury. "You're Cassian's boy," she said before he spoke. "You've got his eyes, but not his fire, yet." Jonah swallowed. "You knew him?" She nodded. "I rode with him, before Greeley turned us all to ash." She pulled out a locket, opened it. Inside, Cassian's face, beside a woman Jonah had never seen. "That's your mother," she said. "And she didn't die how they told you." The woman's voice was brittle, soaked in memory. "Cassian didn't shoot her. He tried to save her. It was Greeley's bullet that found her heart." Jonah stared at the locket, rage and grief tangled in his throat. Why didn't he tell the truth? She laughed bitterly. "Because dead men don't get to argue with judges." Jonah turned away, fists clenched. "He died a villain." She walked over, placed the locket in his palm. "Then let the truth bury the lie, or let it burn." As Jonah rode from Hollow Bluff, he didn't look back. The road ahead was marked in blood now. And justice was no longer a dream. It was a debt. From the bluff's peak, Elijah watched the trail where Jonah disappeared. He hadn't stopped riding since dawn, driven by a fear deeper than faith. The chapel behind him was just wood and regret now. Up ahead, the judge's ranch rose like a scar on the land. White fences, black hearts. Elijah clutched the journal close. "Let the boy find fire," he murmured. "I'll carry the proof." In town, no one saw him pass. Only dust followed. He wasn't going to save Jonah. He was going to make sure the world knew why the boy had to burn it down. The preacher was done praying. Now he'd testify with truth, and if need be, with lead. Jonah rode until his muscles burned, and the trail turned to shale. At a trading post near the edge of the valley, he tied his horse beside the rails and stepped inside. Old newsprints lined the back wall. He scanned them until his hand froze. There it was, Cassian Black, outlaw dead, 1859. The photo was blurred, body face down in a canyon, barely identifiable. Jonah stared at the date. It was 3 days before his birth. He touched the glass. "They buried the truth with him," he whispered. The shopkeep grunted behind him. He wasn't just shot. He was executed. No trial. No last words. They just wanted him gone. Jonah nodded, every breath heavier. This wasn't justice. This was erasure. And now he knew. In the corner of the trading post sat a woman in a scarlet dress, older now but eyes still sharp as broken glass. She lit a cigar with trembling fingers and blew smoke toward Jonah. "You look like him," she said. He turned slowly. "Cassian." She smiled without warmth. "And your mother?" "She came through here once, begging Greeley for mercy. He gave her a grave." Jonah sat down across from her. "Tell me everything." She leaned back, drink in hand. "Cassian was no angel, but he wasn't a killer. Greeley made sure no one asked questions. And your mother, she died trying to stop him." Her hand tightened on the glass. "This town runs on graves built over lies." She handed Jonah a bundle wrapped in silk. Inside, letters, receipts, and a brooch with dried blood still crusted in its grooves. "Your mother wore that the night she died," she said. "Cassian tried to stop Greeley's men. That's why they branded him." Jonah held the brooch like it burned. The metal cut his palm, but he didn't drop it. "Why tell me now?" She shrugged. "Because I buried too many truths to die with this one." Jonah stood slowly, shoulders squared. "I won't let it stay buried." She smiled, softer now. "Then you're already braver than your father." Jonah walked out with the brooch in his hand, the truth heavy in his pocket, and a target blooming on his back. The sun dropped behind the canyon as Jonah climbed the ridge overlooking Greeley's ranch. From there it looked too clean, white fences, trimmed hedges, oil lamps flickering like fireflies. But beneath that polish lived the rot. He lay flat, watching patrols move like clockwork. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Jonah pulled out the locket, the map, and the brooch. His hands shook, but not from fear. "This ends with you," he whispered to the lights below. As night swallowed the land, he marked every path, every blind spot. Tomorrow wouldn't bring justice. It would bring reckoning. And he'd walk into it with eyes wide open. Elijah reached the outskirts just before dawn. The town still slept, unaware of the fire creeping toward it. He found Jonah's tracks leading into the ridge, and followed. When he reached the bluff, Jonah was already gone. But in the dirt, he saw a cross carved beside a bloodstain. Not fresh. Not old. Just a mark. Elijah dismounted, pulled the journal from his saddle, and opened it to the page marked confession. He read it silently, lips trembling. Then he drew his gun, checked the chamber, and closed the book. The time for forgiveness had passed. The boy was ready to reveal the truth. Elijah was ready to defend it, no matter who died. By the riverbank below the judge's land, Jonah waited. The morning mist clung to him like memory. Footsteps echoed behind. Elijah. The boy didn't turn. "You followed me," Jonah said. Elijah nodded. "You left me no choice." Jonah finally faced him, eyes hollow but sharp. "Did you ever think I wouldn't find out?" Elijah didn't defend himself. "I prayed you'd never need to." Jonah held up the journal. "Truth doesn't need prayers, it needs witnesses." Elijah stepped forward, voice cracking. "I lied to protect you." Jonah's lips trembled. "You protected him." The wind shifted. The river carried silence. Elijah laid his hand on Jonah's shoulder. "Let's do what's right, even if it kills us." Jonah didn't pull away. They walked into town side by side. People stopped mid-step, conversations halting like broken clocks. Jonah's face was stone. Elijah's was war-torn. They entered the courthouse, the very place where Greeley had sealed Cassian's fate. Inside, the judge sat flanked by deputies, smug behind his desk. "You come to confess or to beg?" he asked. Jonah stepped forward, voice steady. "Neither. We came to accuse." He threw the journal on the desk. Pages spilled open. Documents, names, blood-sealed records. Elijah added the brooch and locket. "You buried the truth under bodies. It ends now." Greeley's eyes narrowed. "You're a child clinging to ghosts." Jonah stared. "Then you're a man haunted by them." The crowd inside the courtroom began to murmur. Greeley stood slowly. "This is hearsay, relics and rumors." Elijah raised his voice. "No, this is your handwriting. These are your orders. This is her blood." The brooch glinted in the light as Jonah held it up. "You killed my mother and framed my father. You made me into your secret." Greeley's smile faded. "You think they'll believe you?" Elijah took a step forward. "We don't care who believes. We care who listens." From the crowd, a voice rang out. "I knew her." Then, another. "He was no killer." Testimonies poured like floodwater breaching a dam. Truth was rising, and Greeley felt it. For the first time, he stepped back. Greeley's hand moved too fast. One blink, and the room erupted. The revolver flashed from beneath his coat. Elijah moved before Jonah could, body slamming forward, the shot cracking through the church-like silence. Jonah screamed, catching Elijah as he fell. Blood soaked through the preacher's shirt, dark and spreading. Greeley aimed again, but townsfolk surged. Hands grabbed. A deputy fired. The judge fell, wounded but alive, gun clattering to the floor. Jonah cradled Elijah's head, breath shallow. "You said we'd do it together." Elijah coughed, smiling faintly. "We did." Then silence. Not the peaceful kind. The permanent kind. The sun set slow that day, like it didn't want to witness the end. Jonah stood outside the courthouse, blood still on his hands, Elijah's journal under one arm. The town was quiet, ashamed, awakened. Deputies dragged Greeley away, his eyes locked on Jonah's. "Hell become me," the judge spat. Jonah didn't respond. He walked to the chapel, laid the journal on the altar, and knelt where Elijah once stood. "He wasn't my father," he whispered, "but he taught me how to choose who I want to be." His voice didn't break, but his heart did. And in that breaking, he rebuilt something sacred. The boy was gone. The man had risen, in blood, truth, and silence. The boy walked alone through the dead morning silence, dust curling around his boots like the ghosts of everything lost. He wore black, not for mourning but for judgment. In his coat pocket, the letter still burned against his chest. The preacher's confession in shaky ink, every word, a nail. He passed townsfolk who dared not meet his eye. Not now. Not with that gun on his hip, and that fire in his eyes. The church bell did not ring. The sky stayed colorless, as if even God refused to paint this day. He reached the chapel steps and stood there, the wooden cross above looking less like salvation and more like a warning. He did not pray. His jaw clenched, veins like ropes. No tears. Only the slow breathing of a boy turned executioner. He pushed the door open and entered the place that raised him in silence. No hymns. No sermon. Dawn. Just the preacher, already waiting. The preacher stood by the altar, not dressed in vestments but plain clothes. What? No Bible in hand. Only silence. His face was older than yesterday, more tired than any sermon could explain. When he saw the boy, he did not flinch. He only said, "You know now." The boy nodded once. "Since I could read your damn handwriting." The pews creaked as the wind howled through broken panes. "He killed your father," the boy said, voice low, venom steady. "And you raised me like a lamb to slaughter." The preacher looked down, jaw trembling. "I raised you to break the chain, but I failed." A long pause. The boy's hand hovered over the gun. "Why didn't you tell me?" The preacher met his eyes. "Because I loved you more than I hated him." The boy looked at the gun again, then back to the man who was never his blood, but always his father. The silence stretched like a noose. The boy stepped forward. The gun, heavy now, hung in his hand. The preacher didn't move. "You want justice," he said. "But justice don't always bleed the way we want it to." The boy raised the gun, arm trembling. "He was my father." The preacher took a step closer. "No, I was." The boy's breath caught. A tear betrayed him, tracing down his cheek like a confession. "He gave me life," he whispered. "But I gave you a soul," the preacher said. "And I broke it." Thunder rumbled outside, though the sky held no storm. The boy's jaw clenched again. "Say you're sorry." The preacher nodded. "Every day, every breath." The gun shook. Then his hand dropped. He let it fall to the ground, and with it, a lifetime of weight. The judge wrote his final words by candlelight, hand aching, ink running thin. He'd watched it all, from the moment the child was laid on the preacher's doorstep to the silence that followed today. He'd judged worse crimes, but none cut this deep. "Mercy is not justice," he muttered, "but sometimes it's the only sentence we can serve." He folded the paper, sealed it with wax, and left it on his desk. A gust rattled the shutters. In the distance, the church bell rang, for the first time in years. He stood, coat in hand, and walked out alone into the night. The firelight flickered behind him. He didn't look back. The verdict had already been delivered, in silence, in sacrifice, and in the sound of a gun left unfired. The boy lit the match with shaking fingers. The chapel was empty now, save for memories. He struck the flame to the base of the cross, soaked in oil and prayers. It caught instantly. Flames climbed like accusations, licking the rafters. Smoke rose, black and sacred. He stepped back, eyes unblinking. The townsfolk gathered in silence. No one moved to stop him. No one dared. The preacher stood beside him, not pleading, not preaching, just watching. The boy whispered, "This place was never holy, just hiding." The preacher nodded. "Then let truth be your altar." The fire roared. The cross cracked and collapsed, sparks rising like spirits. And in that blaze, everything they were, sins, secrets, salvation, turned to ash. No justice. No revenge. Just an ending. And maybe, somewhere in the cinders, a beginning.